And welcome everyone to the second podcast for USC Think Tank. This is Chase in NYC. We're glad to have you back. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Houston. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I'm ready for game week, baby.
It's the most exciting time of the year. It's it's Christmas Eve, it's New Year's Eve, it's all the eve of summer vacation, all wrapped into one as we're heading into 3 months of bliss, college football season. So I think we've decided to devote this Think Tank podcast to a preview of this game and kind of the developments of the last couple days, which there have been a few worth talking about. So why don't we just launch into it? Chris, you've done quite a bit in the last couple days on forecasting this game, putting to writing your thoughts. Why don't you put into words what you're expecting to see?
Well, one thing I will say is that I think a lot of people think this is going to be a walk in the park. And when you go look at, what happens in college football, and we'll often say to each other, wow, that was really unexpected, or this was a huge surprise. And there's no doubt that college football holds a lot of surprises. But when you look at why we are surprised, I think for the most part it's because we lack information on other teams. We know about our team, but we don't know about what the other team is like. So what tends to happen is when the other team plays well, when they're not supposed to play well, we think, oh, that's really surprising. What a shock. Who could have expected that? And so I feel that one of the ways to get around that is to actually look at the opponents and look at the teams out there. And so what I've actually been doing this offseason is taking a deep dive into the two deeps and recruiting classes of various teams. Now, I've hit most of the national powers. It's a very long process. But this week I did look at Hawaii. I went through their two deep and looked at each one of their units. And now I'm able to tell with some sort of certainty what kind of team they have. Now, it's not a question of, they're Hawaii and they're not very good or they're shit. But now I'm actually having an awareness of what kind of, what their roster looks like. So going into this game, I think, it's a very clear case of USC having more talent, but Hawaii does have some talent there, and it's not going to be a walk in the park by any means.
So let's start to break down some of your observations about Hawaii. Instead of going position by position, how about we just start with what you think the greatest strengths are for this Hawaii team, and maybe you can elaborate on your thoughts.
Well, I really think this is a pretty strong front seven. If you think back to last year's USC-Hawaii game, USC really didn't run the ball with a lot of purpose early on. Whatever gains USC had in the running game seemed to have been coming as a result of whatever it had done in the passing game. And as we all know, that very first play of the season turned into a 75-yard Marquise Lee catch and run. But the Hawaii front seven is definitely the strength of this team. They have very good defensive ends. They have two pretty solid interior run stuffers at defensive tackle who are both 300 pounds plus. One guy, Siasu Matagisi, he's got pretty good feet. He had a really good play last year against SC where Silas Red took a sweep and he laterally moved along the line to the left and was able to catch Silas Red, surprisingly enough. Well, actually, it's not that surprising because Silas Red's not the fastest of guys, but this 300-pound guy moved laterally along the line and caught up to Red and gave him a pretty good licking. So he's pretty talented. The two ends, Tavita Woodward and Bo Yap, are both highly productive. Yap especially had 10.5 tackles for loss last year. So this is a pretty good front four. And the linebackers, Art Laurel, Brendan Daly, and Gerald Garcia-Williams are all pretty good players. Brendan Daly especially is a good mid-round talent guy, and I think he could potentially be a really good player for the Warriors this year. And Laurel had 13.5 tackles for loss last year. Very solid guy, can move really well in space. And then Gerald Garcia-Williams, pretty good, really good disciplined assignment football player. So the front seven is very disciplined, pretty talented, and I think they're going to really key this team. And it's not going to be a walk in the park for the USC offense early on.
Good stuff. I think I have to take exception with only one thing you said, which is when you referred to them as the Warriors. I think we both know they're the Bows. But
all right,
moving along. How about on the other side of the ball? What are Hawaii's the Bows' strength on offense?
the Rainbows, their strength is definitely at wide receiver. They've got some pretty good players here. There's a guy named Scott Harding who actually scored Hawaii's only touchdown last year against USC. He's an Aussie, mate. He's a former Aussie rules football player, so he's got that good speed and toughness as a result. He's also a pretty good punt returner, and he also punts. Because, as you know, on Aussie rules, all those guys have to know how to kick. Behind him is a little receiver. He's a little electric smurf, Donnie King. He hasn't done much for Hawaii yet, but this guy is a legitimate player. He plays with his hair on fire. He's a little guy, but he can make a lot of plays in space. So it's definitely a guy that USC has to keep an eye out for. And probably their most talented receiver is a guy named Chris Gant. Even though he's only 6 feet, 185, he's really a remarkable weapon in the red zone. I saw lots of highlights of him making leaping catches in the red zone and really difficult catches in traffic for touchdowns. And I think this is a guy that USC is going to have to be really careful of. And then, of course, there was a very good group of freshman wide receiver coming in and also a JC guy. They're all really big guys. Marcus Kemp, who's 6'4", 185. Vasquez Haynes is 6'2", 190. And Keith Kirkwood is 6'3", 210. Kemp is from Layton, Utah. Vasquez Haynes is from New Jersey. And Keith Kirkwood, I think, is from Florida. So these are all really fluid, big guys. I think Norm Chow is trying to duplicate what he had with Mike Williams. I don't think these guys are by any means Mike Williams, but they might be, if they're not poor man's Mike Williams, they're at least homeless Mike Williamses. So this is a pretty good group, these receivers, and it's definitely, when you combine that with the fact that their quarterback, Taylor Graham, is a Ohio State transfer, they have some potential down the road to be a pretty good offense. Whether they'll do that against USC remains to be seen.
Let's. It was reported when the camp started in newspapers, and this got a lot of press at the time, that Norm Chow had fired his offensive coordinator on the first day after camp or right leading into camp. What do you expect to see in terms of offensive looks from this Hawaii team?
Well, it's still kind of mysterious as to why he was fired. Clearly, he had to have something personal going on with that guy. I think Chow is going to do a lot of misdirection. I think it'll be typical Norm Chow stuff, really dinking and dunking, waiting for his opportunity, setting plays up. And the problem was last year, if you actually watched the USC-Hawaii game, I was actually impressed by some of how fundamentally sound Hawaii played on offense. They actually moved the ball decently well at times, and granted that was against Monty Kiffin's scheme. But I do think that Chow's one of his strengths is his weakness, or his patience against defenses. So I think he's very good at setting things up. And if they're still in the game later on, those setups usually work out into paying big dividends later on. So I think what he's going to do is he's going to use his running backs quite a bit as receivers. I think he's going to try to go up the top with some of these big wide receivers, and I think he's going to try to use his tight end. Now, ironically, the tight end was one of the few guys on this roster that I didn't get any good tape of, so his name is Harold Molini, so I'm curious to see what kind of player he is.
We've actually, USC, when I say we've played Hawaii quite a few times in recent years. Kind of much to my chagrin, because I'm not a big fan. I know a lot of people love that trip to Honolulu. I'm not a huge fan of us playing Hawaii for a variety of reasons I'm not going to get into right now. But we've been playing them. We played them last year. We played them in Lane's first year, and obviously this is kind of a repeat of that first game for Lane. I mean, this is if this is truly the start of the second era of Lane Kiffin at USC as a head coach, he's going to a fresh start year. It gets off on the same type of foot that we had in 2010, which was Lane's original start at USC when we played at Hawaii. When we played Hawaii back, I think in 2005, is that the right year, in Honolulu?
Yes.
There was a lot made of cheap shots coming from the Hawaii players. Now, that seemed to have been more tame in 2010, but it's always a concern to me. One of the reasons I don't like particularly playing Hawaii. Do you think this is going to get really chippy on the field, like we've seen in previous Hawaii games at times?
I don't think it'll be as bad. Remember, I think 2005 was probably the height of the crystal meth phase in Hawaii. And I'm only slightly facetious here, but really, a lot of those players I thought were some pretty cranked up guys who were playing with their hair on fire and who were, who just are some real thug type players. And I think those are players that were more prevalent during the June Jones era than during the more nice guy Norm Chow era. I don't think he countenances that type of behavior as much as June Jones did. That doesn't mean there aren't some guys who are some pretty hard-hitting dudes, but I don't think we'll see nearly the chippiness that we saw when USC came to Hawaii that year.
Before you move off the Hawaii game, Chris, what weaknesses have you observed in watching tape of this Hawaii team?
The main weakness, which I think will dictate the USC game plan, is really their secondary. A very weak secondary as far as talent. Some very undersized safeties and a couple corners who really can't run. So this should be the kind of secondary for which Lane Kiffin and the Trojan passing game, they should be licking their chops. And so I think a lot of people who think that USC is going to come out with a new identity this year and run the ball down people's throats, I think they're in for a disappointment, because this is the type of game where Lane Kiffin sees the matchup and takes full advantage of it. So I expect us to see a lot of balls in the air, especially early on. Later on, with the game in hand, you might see a lot of running, but I think early on it's going to be a passing attack gone crazy.
So this actually kind of dovetails nicely with one of the points I wanted to get to, which was a post that you had written, I think, yesterday, and put on the Peristyle, which was a theory you had about how the quarterbacks were going to be used in this Hawaii game. So why don't you tell us what your theory is?
Well, I think the thing is that Lane Kiffin wants Max Wittek to be his quarterback. If you look at the history of Lane Kiffin and the types of players he prefers, he has always preferred big pocket passers with big arms. Whenever he can get them, he will take them, and he will always take them over smaller, more mobile types who don't necessarily fit into his concept of a pro-style passer. And we saw it with his tenure at Tennessee, where he walked into Knoxville with a commitment in hand from a guy named Taj Boyd, who was from Virginia. Now, Taj Boyd, as we know, is not your prototypical pocket passer. He's actually about 6'1", 215, which is eerily close to the same size as Cody Kessler. They actually have very similar skill sets. I would say that Taj Boyd is probably a little bit more better athlete, but they're very similar size, similar arm strength, and they have very similar kind of gamesmanship qualities to each other. And neither of them are what you would consider prototypical passers for pro-style offenses. Nonetheless, Kiffin told Boyd to take a hike because, hey, we're running this type of offense and we don't really want you. And Boyd was off to Clemson, where now he is poised to become the all-time ACC passing leader and, of course, a Heisman Trophy candidate. So flash forward to 2013, and we have almost the same type of situation where there is a sort of a gritty 6'1", 215-pound quarterback going up against a prototypical 6'4", 240-pound rocket for an arm quarterback in Max Wittek. Unfortunately for Kiffin's vision of what a quarterback should look like, Wittek has been unable to actually outperform Kessler in practices. And so, therefore, I believe that the reason why we are seeing a co-starter on the depth chart and the notion that Kiffin will play two players is that what he's really trying to do is use the Hawaii game to establish that Wittek is really the quarterback for this team. And I think what he'll do in that game is bring Wittek out first with the ones, have a perfect script for him to execute against that very weak secondary, which will allow him to put up huge numbers via passes to Marquise Lee and Nelson Aguilar. And we're going to see Max Wittek have very good numbers in this game. And when the dust settles, he's going to be able to say, or he hopes to be able to say, Max Wittek came out, he performed, he looked great, he should be the starter. And what will happen is, in his scenario, in his best-case scenario, Wittek comes out and does just what he's supposed to do, Kessler comes in a little later when the pressure is off and there's no need to throw as much, and the play calls will be to start getting their run game going. Kessler's numbers won't look as good as Wittick's, and Wittick will, by all accounts and by very public accounts, be seen as the deserved starter. So I think that's how he wants to proceed. I don't think it takes any major conspiracy theory to come up with this. This is just normal things that coaches do all the time. You see it all the times in position battles where you have two guys who are performing very closely, but one of the guys is the guy that the coach really wants to succeed, so he puts him in a position to succeed. I think that's what we'll see on Thursday.
Just to add a couple thoughts to what you're talking about here. It's interesting, going back to the Taj Boyd situation with Tennessee. After he basically told Taj, don't come here, thank you very much, but we don't want you, he went out and recruited for the next year 2 quarterbacks, Tyler Bray and Matt Sims, Matt Sims being the son, one of the younger son of Phil Sims. Both of those quarterbacks have similarities to Max Wittick. Bray is 6'6", a big kid. Sims, pretty semi-mobile quarterback with a strong arm. Both of them actually have now exhausted their college eligibility, which is interesting. We're not exhausted. They both left college early. And both went undrafted. So it does kind of get into the thought. I think this is revealing of Lane's thought process a little bit. He is kind of stuck in an old mentality of what an NFL quarterback is supposed to be. He tells Taj Boyd, we don't want you. And then he brings in his own 2 quarterbacks, and it turns out the quarterbacks that he brought in are not really what the NFL is looking for anymore.
Well, yeah, it's people say, well, hey, he wouldn't make a decision that would hurt the team. He's going to do things to try to win, and that's very true. But his notion of what it takes to try to win may not be correct. It's sort of like if you're looking at pretty girls and you like a girl with big boobs, and no matter how many small boob girls come along, you're not going to go for them. Even though you might think they're pretty, you're still waiting for that pretty girl who also has big boobs to come along because that's the type of ideal you have of beauty. So doesn't mean that he doesn't like girls or doesn't want to be with a girl, that person. It just means that he has a very different definition of what it takes to be a beautiful woman. And unfortunately, maybe that woman is not the right woman for him. And I think that's kind of a decent analogy to what Lane Kiffin is looking at and the kind of blinders he has when he's choosing his personnel to help his team win.
Yeah, and there's a story here that goes along with this theme of what's happening with fullbacks in the NFL. And I'd like to talk about that in just a second. But before we get to that, one of the thoughts I had with your analysis of this Hawaii game and Wittick Kessler, I'm sitting here thinking one of the striking things about 2012 is that, notwithstanding the idea that Kiffin is going to come out with great scripted plays, which I think we can both agree that that's what that's the way he envisions himself. He kind of sees himself as almost like a Bill Walsh type, where I'm going to come out with 25 scripted plays and everything will be perfect.
Right.
The reality of 2012 is actually very different, and this has been so well documented in various posts by MB2. We were very strong in the second quarter, the even quarters, second quarters and fourth quarters. The quarters where the scripts you would think would be least applicable because you're well into that half of football at that point in time. When it came to having to script plays or rely on predetermined plays, first and the third quarter especially, we were just absolutely terrible. We struggled mightily. So I think I really suspect your theory here is true. I wonder if it's going to be Kessler or Wittick to come out first. I almost think it doesn't really matter who comes on the field first. But I guess my point is that I have a feeling that this might be Lane's plan, but things might not go according to plan, which has happened quite a few times during his era. That he might have a plan for something like, hey, 2012, let's win Marquise Lee the Heisman Trophy. That plan didn't exactly go so well. So
yeah. I think if you look at it, one explanation for why those first quarter scripts and maybe those third quarter scripts didn't work very well, because a lot of times teams do have scripts coming out of the third quarter. Maybe it's that the scripts that USC installed during the week were just too much for the team to really get down at a proficient level, and that once they returned to their base offense in those second quarters and their fourth quarters, they were actually able to use their talent with plays that were very familiar with them, whereas these new plays in these scripts, which they had installed, they probably worked on very little during the week. They only have 20 hours to work on it after all. Maybe that won't apply as much in the opener, but I think during the weeks themselves in season, it might be more of an issue.
I think that's right. I think there's part of that is that I think there's unnecessary complexity to Lane's scripted plays, and you see this a lot when he comes out, especially in third quarters, and you see him in the first quarter too. And I think in a future podcast I'll elaborate more on this, because this is a big kind of hobby horse of mine. We do so much what I would call pointless pre-snap shifting and motioning. I know there's theories of football that say gives the offense a real big advantage. For the life of me, I can't figure out what advantage we're getting from all the shifting and motioning. I mean, I grew up in a system. I played at Loyola High School myself. We had a very complex offensive system to a certain degree, so I'm very familiar with shifting and motioning. I don't think in modern football you win football games because you're able to identify who the strong safety, what kind of coverage he's in. I mean, you need general identifications of defenses, but all the shifting we do really confuses our players much more than identifies weaknesses on the defense. And what we saw happen in second quarters and fourth quarters, among other things, is that there was we'd start games, we do all this like cutesy shifting and motioning and these short dump off passes, and things would not go well. And then desperation sets in, and we say, screw it, let's just play football. We go out, we throw the ball over the middle a little bit. We have amazing athletes, the receiver. They make big plays, and all of a sudden the offense is moving again. Then we get to the third quarter, and we're back in the game thanks to the second quarter. And in the third quarter, we're like, well, let's go back to the shifting and the motioning and the cutesy stuff. And then by the time the fourth quarter rolls around, we realize that the third quarter was a waste, and we have to play football again. By then, a lot of time at the end of the season, at least, it was too late. So I don't know if we'll see a repeat of that this season. And maybe it might not matter for the first game of the season, because this is obviously the 1 week where we have an endless amount of time to prepare for a team. But if this quarterback quote unquote competition were to continue for the first 3 games, I could definitely see that any master plan that Lane would have of trying to engineer an offense so that Whittick will win, I could see it backfiring very easily.
Absolutely. And I think if you were a Lane Kiffin supporter and you were looking for signs that he was on his way to kind of righting the ship, and if you were maybe writing the script before the season about the things you would like to see heading into the season that would be writing the script, I don't think you would have this scenario in your script at this point. I don't think you would be saying that ideally you want to have a quarterback controversy heading into the very make-or-break season for Lane Kiffin. I think ideally you would have had a smooth transition to a new starting quarterback. You would have had very smooth transitions to settled positions on the offensive line. Neither of those things happened. You would have had definitely a single tailback who would have grabbed the job. None of those things happened. About the only thing we really do know about this offense is that the receivers are pretty good. Actually, really good, I should say. Everything else, huge question mark. So I think this does not bode well for Lane Kiffin's future. And if you're thinking of reasons why USC might lose a game out of the next 4 games, or the first 4 games, games that they're technically supposed to win based on perceptions of what the talent is, I think this is not a good start. I think if you wanted an ironclad reason why they're going to win all 4 games, I think that reason is starting to spring leaks based on what we've seen in the first last couple weeks of training camp.
Yeah, and there's even like some of the other little things that they maybe at the end of the day they won't matter, but you might look back and say this doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think traditionally the captains are named at the Salute to Troy event. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, correct. We have not seen any captains. It's almost like it's just a weird environment right now at USC with the closed practices. It's funny because of the environment, you start to look for weird things that just don't seem right. And it's funny, even in that video where Lane Kiffin and Marquise Lee are giving ice cream to the band. At the very end, they both give a victory sign, and Marquise Lee gives a proper, palms out victory sign, and Lane Kiffin's victory sign is like a back of the hand toward the camera victory sign, which is British for up yours. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, while we have some time here,
Nothing's going right for Lane. He can't even do a victory sign right. Can't even execute it.
So let's talk about this quarterback competition. I know we discussed in the first podcast. It's been beat to death on the boards. We really, you have your theory about what's going to end up happening. Do you think that by the time we get to, let's say, Wazoo, that we're going to have a better idea of what's going on with these quarterbacks, or do you think this might just be, we might be in kind of a state of, I don't know if chaos is the right word, but just uncertainty for the next 6 weeks?
My belief is that it will be a 2-quarterback system until Wittek shows he can be the quarterback. Unless Kessler just plays lights out. It will take Kessler playing lights out and Wittek playing like complete poop for Kessler to win the job. For Wittek to win the job, he will just have to show that he can handle it and that he is a viable alternative to Kessler. So the burden of proof for Wittek in Kiffin's mind will be much, much lower. But I do think that we are more likely to see Wittek being named the starter coming out of Hawaii, and then we'll go forward. But I can also see if Wittek struggles, as I expect he will, Kessler maybe having opportunities to do his stuff as well.
One of the rumors out there right now is that we have the injury bugs that hit the offensive line. We can't really verify what's going on for sure, but there have been rumors today that Marcus Martin was hurt, and then no, he's actually okay. But now that John Martinez's foot is in a boot, and Andre Walker might be hurt. What do you expect to see with our reconstructed offensive line, which is obvious, everyone pointed to as the problem in 2012. What do you expect to see on Thursday?
Unlike last year, I think the offensive line can actually be more of an issue this year, at least in the early going, because of what we've seen with the injury issues and the shuffling, and also because of the uncertainty at quarterback. Guys with different cadences and guys who are reading different things, coming up to the line. I think this is more of an issue than last year, where you had 4 or 5 guys returning. You only had to, put Andre Walker in at left tackle, but you had Matt Barkley and Robert Woods and all these guys there to kind of make sure everybody was on the same page. And if you look at the numbers, despite what the naysayers say, last year's line was more than proficient enough as far as giving up sacks or yards per carry and all that. So while it wasn't the world's greatest line, definitely a good enough line to have a good season. So you flash forward to this year, and you have to wonder if, with the line looking so uncertain and the quarterback situation so uncertain, this offense as a whole is going to take some time to gel. I think Lane Kiffin thinks that because of these first few games that he has time to get the offense to gel, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that he is definitely looking at things with a bit of wishful thinking. And I think that there's a real danger for USC as a result. If they don't get their offense in order quick, like a game like Washington State can quickly USC can quickly fall behind against a team like Washington State with Mike Leach's offense, and suddenly USC's offense has to produce under pressure, and that's not the kind of situation you want a young quarterback to be in.
What are your thoughts about the secondary heading into Thursday? We assume that Hawaii is going to be passing the ball quite a bit. There's at the one cornerback spot. I mean, both cornerback spots. There's not a lot of confidence, I guess, that have been instilled in SC fans watching our cornerback play, especially with these guys coming back. How do you think they're going to perform early in the season?
I think they'll be pretty good. I don't think there are any real. They're not going to go up against any major talent at receiver in the early going. I do think that the pass rush at least the pressure that'll be coming as a result of Kennard and Breslin coming out the edge will really help the coverage for the corners in the early going, especially since they'll probably play more press coverage. I think that's going to help them. I think the safeties are lights out and will be able to roll over to help in coverages for any of these corners that are having problems. I'm really not worried that much about the secondary. I'm not really worried that much about the defense from a personnel standpoint. I'm worried more about the defense from a schematic standpoint, in the sense that, hey, look, some of these gambling type schemes by the defense will result in some big plays being let up. And so what will happen when those plays happen? How will the defense respond? How will the offense respond? It's just a different kind of defense for USC this year. It reminds me a lot of 1992 when Larry Smith was very desperate to sort of reinvigorate the program after a 3-8 season, and he brought in he changed his defense to a sort of Washington-style defense with two corners and blitzing 9 guys in every play, and it resulted in some incredible tackles for loss and sacks numbers for USC. It also resulted in a lot of huge plays, as exemplified by Gerald Henry riding the back of J.J. Stokes for 90 yards. So I don't think USC is quite in that type of situation personnel-wise, but I do think that the secondary has a chance to give up big plays as a result.
Yeah, I'm just forecasting for myself here. I think the teams that have mobile quarterbacks, when I mean mobile, quarterbacks that are able to elude the first pass rusher and get that ball off, those are the teams that are going to give us some problems on defense. Because we are going to get to the quarterback, but it's going to be when we miss that sack and the play breaks down a little bit, and then there's going to be some open receivers downfield. So that's my guess, is the teams that are real. And Stanford, I think, is going to be a team that's going to give us a lot of
I definitely agree with that point about the quarterback, except for the one thing that Washington State will bring to the table, and this is what Leach was able to do at Texas Tech, is that when he's going to come out there with 5 wides, you have to have 5 guys who can cover those guys. And if you don't get to the quarterback, you've got 5 guys running wild. Most teams have two guys who can cover, and those are their 2 corners. USC should have 3 or 4 guys who can cover, but SC is going to need 5 guys who can cover, because not only are there going to be 5 guys running around, but they're going to be running a lot of plays, and they're going to be shuffling guys in and out, and it's going to be sort of at a breakneck pace. Guys get tired. And that's sort of the mentality of Leach's offense, which is to wear you down mentally in the secondary and then eventually break a big play. So I think that's actually also a danger to USC's defense as well. That sort of scheme that forces 4 or 5 defensive backs who can cover. If Anthony Brown's out there covering Robert Lewis, who's a pretty nifty little scat back or slot guy for Washington State, will he be able to cover him? That remains to be seen.
Indeed, it does. These new schemes, not necessarily new, but a lot of teams are employing them now, these 4 or 5 receiver schemes. It's interesting because I was watching on Thursday night, or maybe it was last night, the Fox broadcast of the Cowboys-Bengals game. And there was a lot of Daryl Johnston, the great fullback from Syracuse, was in the booth. And right away, they started discussing this new development in the NFL, where teams are moving away from even having fullbacks on the roster.
Wow.
So this is really, these are changing times. They're essentially replacing fullbacks with tight ends. And the Bengals, for instance, they maintain a fullback in position. And there's a guy lined up in front of the tailback, but they're essentially trying to put Orson Charles, the Georgia tight end, at that position. Where they had gone out and signed a really traditional big thumping fullback from the Jets, and that guy might not even make the team. It's this new era of football. We're not going to have these big thumping fullbacks for too much longer. A couple teams will have them. They made a great point in this Fox broadcast, which is in high school play, they're disappearing. So you're not even going to have people learning the fundamentals of the position.
Well, you can say the same about a lot of drop-back quarterbacks. When most of the quarterbacks are coming out of spread systems, are coming out of shotgun systems. You're seeing very few guys under center, yet they're trying to get guys to learn how to take snaps under center. So, the NFL will eventually come kicking and screaming into the modern era of offense. But I always love the terminologies that are being used. Like, you always hear things about trying to get guys into space, so they try to get guys into space because everyone acknowledges that when you get good athletes into space, good things happen. And yet there's no attempt to really make that an overall emphasis of an offense. Instead, the expectation is that you will run your normal phone booth offense and occasionally try to get those guys into space. So it's just such a weird mentality to me, as someone who watches college football very closely and sees all the varietals of offenses in college football, and to see these offenses that make getting players into space just a daily or a normal part of their game plan. Every play is about that. Whereas in the NFL, it's like they have to drop these special plays in order to get athletes into space, as if hey, let's drop a play that actually might work and gain yards. Wouldn't that be cool?
Right. Although I have to, because I've been, after boycotting watching the NFL for about 15 years, the last few years I've actually paid much more attention. And
as have I.
Slow as it may be, there are certain teams now. I mean, if you watch the New England Patriots play, very little of what they're doing on offense involves trying to the shoebox at all.
Absolutely, and same with the Redskins as well.
Right, the Redskins. I mean, there's a lot of the Green Bay Packers. But yes, there are. It's funny. A lot of the essentially the bad teams in the NFL. If you watch the Jets, especially last year, I mean, it was comical that Mark Sanchez is not a good NFL quarterback when you stretch an imagination, but he would go out there and their idea of a big play is going to be like a 7-yard out to the tight end. I mean,
exciting.
Now it's funny enough the Jets have brought in they had. Brian Schottenheimer as the offensive coordinator, which never made much sense to me. They've brought in Marty Mornhinweg, who's has this enormous reputation in the NFL, but he purports to run a quote-unquote West Coast offense. However, if you're to watch what the Jets have done this season so far, it involves guys running down the field and trying to get in space much, much more so. So, and Rex Ryan, of course, is the kind of the last guy in the world to open his mind to new ways of thinking. But even I think his job's on the line, and he's opening up his offense. I don't know if Lane's going to do the same. I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, it's I've always gone with that. Coaches coach what they know. There's a reason Lane Kiffin does what he does. It's because that's what he's been taught. That's what he's learned, and that's what he's come up with his philosophy. It's sort of like asking somebody who is a Democrat to suddenly turn into a Republican or vice versa. I think it's more of a gradual situation over time. There's very few situations where I've seen where longtime coaches with established reputations have been able to switch over to new philosophies. And I think, Bob Stoops is an example of a guy. He had a very different philosophy early in his career, and then he switched over to more of a spread air raid style. Or, he had actually started with the air raid style, and then it sort of devolved into sort of a very package-based pro style attack, and then he went back to it, and he revved it up again, and they got good again. And if you look at Mac Brown with Texas, they were trying to fit Vince Young into their pro style offense for the first 2.5 years of his career, and they finally realized that just give the guy the ball and put it in a rudimentary spread, and hey, maybe we'll win a national title, and that's what he did. So I think there are cases of coaches who are able to change because one, either they're not necessarily offensive gurus, maybe they're on the defensive side of the ball, as Bob Stoops had the reputation of being. So, and second, I think that for self-preservation purposes, they've been successful enough to where their egos don't get in the way of changing things. So, unfortunately, I think if Pete Carroll had just made a change around 2006 to a more spread type of offense, I'm almost certain that USC would have won another national title or two. Yes,
I think that's I don't see how they couldn't have, because for the next 3 years, 06, 07, 08, there's strong arguments to be made that we're one bad, stupid loss away from a national championship in each of those seasons, and each one involved offensive breakdown.
Right.
And we can go into that maybe in a future podcast.
Oh, by the way, did you find that post by Ryan interesting, where he talked to Yogi Roth? And I tried to tell Ryan that he shouldn't take Yogi Roth seriously, but he doesn't want to listen. And to my knowledge, he doesn't even understand that Yogi was partially responsible for one of the worst losses in USC history. But I do find it interesting that Yogi Roth, despite that connection, is continuing his upward rise through the world without being called upon it ever.
Well, he's called upon in certain places, not to his face, but the whole Yogi Roth phenomenon. I just continues to amaze me, especially
That's a whole separate podcast, the Yogi podcast,
the Yogi Roth podcast. You watch him at the Elite 11 camp. He to the extent that what he's saying is just not endless reading cliches,
gobbledygook.
Yeah, his essentially the message that he puts out there is a very traditional message about quarterback play, what you need from quarterbacks, and the arm and the 4-step drop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I found it funny that they're in preparing for my fantasy season this year. We were looking at different numbers on quarterbacks. And I start to look at this Seattle Seahawks team, and they've now become one of the the it teams in the NFL now, along with the 49ers. Both teams, interestingly, and despite the coaching pedigrees of Carroll and Harbaugh, both teams are now basically read option teams, which I think is very interesting. If you go through Pete Carroll's first 2.5 seasons in Seattle, his overall record was something along the lines of 4 games under 500. This is taking us through more than half the season last year. Week 12, Seattle has a bye week, and they use that bye week to install the read option with Russell Wilson. And following that, they come back the first game, they lose the kind of a nail-biter in Chicago, which is a tough game. Then they reel off 6 straight victories. And really were, maybe a down or two away from playing the 49ers in the NFC Championship. Largely on the back of Russell Wilson's play out of the read option. I mean, even Pete Carroll is now moved into the 21st century on offense. Yogi Roth, I don't think is ever going to get there. So
it's sad, and fortunately Yogi can just go skydiving off the cliffs of Rio de Janeiro into the sunset at some point, and hopefully we'll. I don't know. It's just it's a frustrating scenario to see him opining on these telecasts. Just for what, I don't know, because he knew Pete Carroll, or he's a best-selling author now. I don't know.
You have a pretty liberal definition of best-selling.
Right. It's
author.
Just don't get me started any further.
All right. Well, we're going to head into break here. Probably we'll come back with a little bit more, and maybe we'll have a guest. So don't wait down the holiday road. Okay, we are back with a guest for this week's podcast. We have 2K2 Jake from the Think Tank. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on, guys. Welcome, Jake.
Thanks for coming on. So Jake is I believe, third generation Trojan at least. Why don't you, Jake, tell us a little bit about your pedigree as a Trojan?
Absolutely. Actually, technically, we recently found out that I'm a 4th generation Trojan. We were going through some old paperwork from my great-grandfather and found out he actually transferred to USC from UCLA and graduated his senior year from SC. So, I come from a long line of Trojans ingrained in me from birth. So great-grandfather graduated, grandfather graduated, grandmother attended, and then married the Trojan, and I believe she dropped out. After that, my dad went, and then both of my older sisters went, and then I married a Trojan that I met our first day in Cardinal Gardens. So definitely deeply ingrained.
That's a storybook tale right there of Trojan royalty, I must say.
You'd think that at this point there would be some sort of building or hall named after me, but no.
So when Dana Point Trojan or South County Trojan or whatever he's calling himself these days, Lot 42, when he accuses you of not going to USC, you don't think that's a fair charge?
Yeah, it's just a little bit off.
All right. Well, so you really you're a great person to interview as far as going back to the discussion we had in the first podcast about the kind of history of the message boards, because I think, and you even wrote me this, you grew up on these message boards. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your kind of history of attending games and then your history of posting on the USC message boards?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't end up attending games until probably the late 90s. We used to just always kind of watch it on TV, and I was always a sports fan, but was not really a diehard until I got into my teen years. But once my older sister started going to SC and I started going to games, and on a regular basis we'd go out to 4 or 5, 3 to 4 games a year, and got really into it. And I actually got onto the message boards really early. My random username is 2K2, but that means absolutely nothing. I think I actually started on the boards in 2001 as a lurker on Ryan's boards and the Wild West boards. Definitely kind of felt out of place because I knew I was a young one, because at the time I was in high school, but quickly found the courage to start posting. And some of my favorite memories, I remember skipping school for letter of intent day to stay home to see who was signing and participating in the really, really fun chats that we used to have, specifically with Chris in there as tea leaves and recruiting guru, and you guys all telling us what faxes were being faxed in currently, and dealing with the Whitney Lewis drama and things of that nature. And so
that's actually going back like a decade now, which is pretty remarkable to think about it.
Yeah, no, and I believe there's a very probably still on the internet some incriminating post I put up the day I got into USC on the Wild West board, where I posted at 2 a.m, very inebriated and excited, but all part of growing up, I guess.
Yeah, definitely an interesting background you have there, and it's amazing how far back it goes, and how far back some of us have relationships, even though we didn't necessarily realize it at the time, and now we've sort of come full circle, and now we're kind of back on the same message board.
Yeah, it's funny how it works, but it's the cream rises to the top.
Right, exactly. This is like the think tank in some ways is very much like everybody gets to come home.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Jake, amongst there's so many things we could talk about, but one of the things I would love to talk to you about, because you're almost like an amateur expert on this one topic, which is the misinformation about everyone's most hated network, the Pac-12 network. I think we both of us concede there was many flaws in how the coverage has gone and kind of the way it was sold. However, I think the myths and disinformation about what's happened, and there's a certain group of people who've been pushing misinformation about the Pac-12 network. It almost outweighs these kind of flaws in the rollout. So why don't you just give us some of your thoughts, and then I'll chime in from time to time.
No, absolutely. So, when the Pac-12 network was first, being talked about, and Larry Scott had been brought on, and everyone was very excited. He was doing things that hadn't been done before, and we signed this landmark $2 billion deal, which was, almost twice what anyone thought we were going to get. And he was able to do that while still holding back 36 games for the Pac-12 network. And at the time, everyone was very excited about this. It was seen as a total win. But especially within a few months, they were able to announce the formal creation of the network and already had 4 major carriers lined up: Cox, Comcast, Time Warner, and Bright House, which was unprecedented in terms of sports networks. And in fact, in college sports, there was really only the Big Ten network, which became super successful, but had its own growing pains. So what started out as something that everyone was very excited about quickly managed to turn as they crawled closer to launch. And it was really, on the peristyle at least, it was really due to the effort of a few individual posters who kept posting about their inside little birds and little sources at Bristol for some reason, talking about what a gigantic failure it was going to be. So it's been kind of a personal mission of mine to kind of correct a lot of these errors, because I've never seen so much misinformation put out for reasons I can't really comprehend.
Yeah, and I mean, first amongst them is one with, well, there's many things. One of the criticisms I've read on the Parasile is that the production quality is low, which could not be further from the truth when you look at its best competitor, which is the Big Ten network. I think the production value of both networks are pretty high, all things considered, and the Pac-12 network has a better production value.
I absolutely agree with that. The number of sporting events covered, the HD quality, the investment in some commentators like Rick Neuheisel, who's apparently turned into a very kind of likable TV analyst. And again, it is really this thing where there's just a misinformation about the quality of the broadcast and how many people the network actually reaches. Some USC fans believe all of our games are on the Pac-12 network, and a lot of people believe that no one can get the Pac-12 network unless you live in some special area that they don't.
I don't know how this myth continues on that people honestly think that they're not going to be able to watch any USC games this season because every game is on the Pac-12 network.
Hey, let me jump in here. Jake, just moving on to just a slightly different topic. Just to get you on record, I want to get everybody on record when they do the podcast. And what do you foresee for the season? And what do you think is going to happen with the coaching situation and with the team?
It's a tough season because the talent is there, the schedule's there. There's just not the leadership there at the top. I really envision this to be another 8-5 team. That's kind of what the record tells us is going to happen. And until I kind of see results on the field, like when you see a unified offense, a team that plays fast and free and knows what they're doing on both sides of the ball, I really don't think it matters how talented we are going forward. Unfortunately, I really hope I'm wrong about this. I'm very excited for the season to start, but the way things are going, I don't anticipate the same coaching staff being here come December.
Well, at least we won't be able to watch it because it'll all be on the Pac-12 network.
Exactly.
And let me just say, because I know that some people are going to be incensed when they, even on the think tanks, when people will be incensed when they hear Jake and my comments about the Pac-12 network. But we both concede there are problems with the Pac-12 network, and especially with the coverage and how things have been messed up. But we just think things have been misstated.
Absolutely. Definite mistakes made. There's debates you could have over equity and the distribution model, but there's just way more incorrect facts out there than actual facts.
Mistakes were made. It's one of my favorite phrases to use. It's so passive.
Yes.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm sure mistakes have been made in this podcast, but hopefully minimal. Thanks, Jake, for joining us. Really appreciate taking some time out of your evening. And hopefully at some point in the future, we'll be able to get you back on here.
Thanks, Jake. We'll see you on the tank.
Really appreciate it, Chris and Chase. Thanks for having me. Right on, guys.
Thanks. All right. We will be right back. Okay, we are back. So as a little special feature this week, as we head into the first week of the season, Chris is going to give you his expert picks with 3 games, Chris?
Well, I'm actually going to give you 7 games that I think are good plays this week. Locks of the week.
Locks of the week. All right.
Well, and I'm going to tell you why I think they are actually pretty good calls. The first game I'm looking at is the Washington State-Auburn game. Right now, the over-under on that is 59 points. I've actually had the opportunity to look at Auburn's new quarterback, Nick Marshall. I think Auburn's offense is going to be really interesting and very dynamic, and they should put up some pretty big numbers and points all season. Nick Marshall's an athletic freak. He's not so much a great passer, but he's just a really exciting runner, and they've got a couple other good runners, Trey Mason, And they've also got another good backup quarterback in Jeremy Johnson who can come in if need be. I think with Gus Malzahn and Auburn, that's a team that's going to score a lot of points, especially against a team like Washington State coming across country. And, of course, Leach will be better in his second year, and their offense will be much better.
Yeah, I could definitely see that game going into to the 70-point, 80-point combined score there. So I think over is a good play.
Yeah, I really like the over for Washington State Auburn.
So next you have this Northwestern game, and Northwestern is going to Berkeley.
Yeah, and Northwestern's an 8.5-point favorite. I think Cal is on the right track. They've got a pretty good receiving core. They've got a couple good running backs, one really good running back if Brendan Bigelow is healthy. But they are starting a freshman quarterback, and they do have major issues in their back seven. So I really think that Northwestern, which is a very well-coached team with Kane Coulter and Venrick Mark, and also a very tough defense, I think this is a team that will basically have their way with Cal, or at least have their way with them to the point where Cal is never really in it. I can see Northwestern winning this one by a couple touchdowns at least.
Is this the Cal's first game in the new stadium?
First game in the new stadium, starting a freshman quarterback in a new system, new coach. A coach who I think is going to be very good, but Cal just has a brutal opening schedule, so I think they'll be better this year, but their schedule and their record will not reflect it.
Yeah, I could see Cal being overwhelmed pretty severely. This does not look like a good matchup for Cal, even though they're playing at home. Okay, the next game that you have is Mississippi, Ole Miss, at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and Vanderbilt's a minus 1.5-point favorite. But I've actually looked at Ole Miss's two deep, and this is going to be a really good front seven for Ole Miss. Their defense is loaded. As we expected, Robert Nikimichi, however you pronounce his name, is going to start at one defensive end. There's also his brother. Everyone talked about the younger Nikimichi, but his brother is pretty much a phenom. He's a linebacker. He's an undersized linebacker, but if you've ever seen the old Tasmanian Devils, go at it, I think, from the cartoons, I think you'll be reminded of him by the older Nikimichi, Denzel Nikimichi. So he's a really good player. They've also got an incoming JC defensive tackle named Lavon Hooks, who will be, I think, an eventual first-round pick at defensive tackle. So the front seven for Ole Miss is excellent, and they've got a couple good guys in the secondary. As we know, Vanderbilt isn't exactly an offensive juggernaut, so I think they're going to have a hard time moving the ball against Ole Miss. Meanwhile, Ole Miss is decently proficient on offense. They've got a guy named Bo Wallace who's sort of a poor man's Colin Klein, and they've got a couple good receivers in Vince Sanders and Dante Moncrief, and I think they have a chance to make some things happen on offense, whereas I think Vanderbilt's going to have a really hard time against that front seven of Ole Miss. So that's why I think, when all is said and done, I see Ole Miss covering that 1.5-point spread.
This could be interesting. I'm reminiscent of recent early season SEC conference battles.
6-3.
Yeah, exactly. Teams really struggled to score. This could be one of those.
Yeah, this will be a race to the bottom as far as offense goes.
Right. It's what a beautiful way to start to get people excited about college football. 3-2 game. Next game you have on here is Northern Illinois going to Iowa City and playing the Hawkeyes. Yeah,
this is the start of the farewell tour for Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. Northern Illinois has Jordan Lynch, who's not a real Heisman candidate, but he's a Heisman caliber type player. Finished 7th in the Heisman race last year. Really dynamic, all-purpose guy, can run it and pass it. And he got Northern Illinois last year, I think, to the Orange Bowl where they got smashed by Florida State. But Northern Illinois, I think, is just better than Iowa, and they're a 6.5-point underdog to the Hawkeyes. To me, I just think this is a possible money line bet, straight up Northern Illinois win. Yeah,
I'll tell you, if you do a Google search for Kirk Ferentz, or you start to type in the name Kirk Ferentz, the first three things that pop up are Kirk Ferentz buyout, Kirk Ferentz contract, and Kirk Ferentz fired. Iowa fans, a lot of them are pretty excited to see him go, and I think this exactly what you said. This might be the beginning of his last season.
Exactly.
The next game you have on there is kind of one of the marquee matchups for the first weekend. The defending national champions, two-time defending national champions. I think we've heard of them, the Alabama Crimson Tide, They're playing Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and they're 18-point favorites at Virginia Tech. Look, this is not the Virginia Tech that we remembered from when USC played them in 2004. This is a much more circumspect roster. They are so bad on offense, and they're getting worse because they hired offensive coordinator Scott Loeffler, who last we checked had destroyed the offenses of both Florida and Auburn. Yet he still gets jobs. And so now he's at Virginia Tech, and Logan Thomas just has not looked good in the preseason. This is an offense that I think will have a very hard time scoring against Alabama. So when you have 0 points, it's really hard to cover. I think Alabama, just from pure inertia, will score 28 points at least. So I see this as being a giant blowout for Alabama, easily covering that 18-point spread.
Yeah, I think it's Alabama's going to score more than 28. I have a feeling. I think they're going to score in the 40s, but we'll see, I guess. Next game you have on here are the Sooners, Bob Stoops Sooners against Louisiana Monroe, which was an interesting team in 2012.
They were. Oklahoma, I think, will be an interesting team. And it's funny, in the past, the pattern with Oklahoma has been that whenever they've been overlooked, they've tended to do better. Whenever they've been underlooked, they've tended to do worse. So Oklahoma, nobody's really talking about them, but they have a lot of talent on that team. They have a great receiving core. They have a very good offensive line. They have a good front seven, and they've got an All-American corner, an All-American center. So the issue's been who's going to be their quarterback. Well, Trevor Knight, he won the starting quarterback job over Blake Bell, and everyone thought it was going to be Blake Bell, including myself, because Bell is himself quite a talent. But Trevor Knight, I've seen tape of him. I've evaluated him. He's just that good. This is a guy who I think has a chance to be sort of a shorter Marcus Mariota. He is about as fast as Mariota, or maybe slightly slower, but he's very similar as a passer, very strong arm, very accurate, very athletic. And Oklahoma's apparently going to go toward a more of a spread option this year. So I see Trevor Knight really flourishing in that role. And right now they're sort of undervalued. I think they'll be undervalued for a while as long as he's the starter. So I see Oklahoma really pouring it on against Louisiana Monroe. Trevor Knight coming out with a huge debut, and Oklahoma covering that 23-point spread.
All right, and the last game you have on here are our friends from Westwood, the Bruins, taking on the Wolfpack of Nevada, Reno.
Yeah, I like the over on this one. The over-under is 66.5. Look, these are two teams that thrive on offense. UCLA, of course, has Brett Hundley going into his second year. They've got a good receiving core. They don't have an established running back, but they have some guys who are pretty good, who are going to step to the forefront. They've got most of their starters back on the offensive line. This is going to be a pretty good offense under Noel Mazzone with UCLA. And Nevada, of course, is still going to keep running the pistol. They've got Cody Fajardo, who's a very good quarterback who's a good passer and a good runner. Still a very dynamic offense. And, of course, UCLA's secondary is going to be starting 2 or 3 freshmen, very inexperienced guys. Their front seven will be pretty good, but their back four is going to be a real problem. So I can see Nevada putting up a lot of points as well. So I think this will be a shootout. I think UCLA wins the game, but I think we're looking at like a 51-35 type game and a lot of points.
All right. Well, I'm going to be interested. We'll review next week how those picks went. I have a feeling you're going to be correct on most of them. I'm going to read you a quote, Chris, and I want you to get your thoughts here.
Okay.
Kiffin is a fantastic football coach and a phenomenal recruiter.
Yeah, Kiffin is a fantastic football coach and a phenomenal recruiter, and if he gets fired, he will be snapped up by somebody else. This was a quote by Pete Futak of College Football News. It's funny. I've had experiences with Pete in the past when I was an SID. He came out to USC a couple times. He's a big Wisconsin guy. If you ever watch or read collegefootballnews.com, you'll notice he always sort of gives Wisconsin so many benefits of the doubt. It's pretty ridiculous. But look, he's a guy. I think people like having Lane Kiffin around at USC because it keeps USC down. To make that kind of quote really just defies, I think, understanding of the situation that USC is in. And he seems to think, along with his riding mate, that Lane Kiffin's role in the hot seat is overblown. Of course, we know that he's going to have a really good year to survive.
a little bit of interaction with him on by email. I'll just leave it at this. I was not very impressed. Well, I guess last thing for the podcast, we're heading into the Hawaii game. Let's get your pick.
Well, I do think USC will win. I do think that they have a significant talent advantage. I do think that given their weaknesses and given Kiffin's propensity to exploit weaknesses, that this actually plays into USC's strength, which is their passing game. I do think that USC will be sloppy, and I do think that Kiffin, of course, will probably run the kind of game plan that will probably shoot himself in the foot. And as we know, and as I've said from the very beginning, in fact, 3 years ago at Hawaii, after that opening win for Lane Kiffin, I opined that whatever Lane Kiffin's teams do, they just somehow don't add up. They are not the sum of their parts. I think that'll be the same how it is in this opener. I think USC wins but doesn't cover. I think they win 41-21.
I'm going to go with 38-17, but I think we're in the same ballpark. All right, Chris, thank you very much. And,
thank you.
For Chris Houston, this is Chase at NYC signing off. Talk to everyone soon.
See you guys later.